Greetings, fellow historians. Welcome to another lesson today as we continue our journey through the Second World War. Now, by this point, you should have already gone through the lessons regarding Pearl Harbor and reasons Japan attacked that small atoll in the Central Pacific. You should have also taken a look at what the United States is doing to prepare for war, both on the home front socially and on the home front economically. What is the United States doing to ramp up its production and begin to take a wartime footing? And the impact on the home front of the war, particularly with women, Rosie the Riveter, and we can do this, and African Americans with the Tuskegee Airmen and the Native Americans, Navajo code talkers, are all going to be a part of this great tapestry, this great diverse nation that is going to begin to engage Europe and the Pacific on a two-front war. And lest we forget the social scars of the Second World War with Japanese internment. So a lot happening on America's home front, but what is happening overseas? What is happening in Japan? What is happening in Europe? Now, in the course of putting this discussion together, I do note that normally in class, we will have a few slides and we'll discuss, have a few slides and discuss, but in this online platform, it seems to be much more a lecture. And so I'm not the biggest fan of just kind of disseminating this information with slide and slide and slide. So I'm going to do my part today to kind of break this discussion up with some short little videos to add to the visual excitement of our time together today. On top of that, I was, in essence, just looking at major turning points of World War II militarily. And what ended up happening is I had slide after slide after slide, and this thing just continued to expand and grow and grow and grow. And I thought, nobody's going to sit here and listen or watch this for the better part of an hour. So I'm going to break up today's discussion with the Pacific, and we'll spend some time talking about that. And then on a whole separate discussion and video series, we'll be talking about Europe. It is important to know, though, with World War II, and one of the great challenges with teaching this portion of the course is paring it down into just the bare essentials. I mean, you could take just this war alone. Heck, you could take just one battle out of World War II. For instance, the D-Day invasion, or the Rommel-Montgomery chase that's occurring in North Africa, or the Doolittle raid in Tokyo, or even the assault off of the decks of the Enterprise on Midway Islands. You could take any of those lessons and really just parcel out hours and hours and hours of information. So the great challenge today is taking just the bare bones essentials of each of these and kind of painting for you the overarching picture of what is happening in the United States. Let's take a look at our slideshow and begin by looking at some of the color photographs that are coming out of this time period. We've been talking extensively about the Stanford Historical Research Project and their colorization of photos. We see another photo here. I don't know the location of this photo, but it looks as if it's taken across one of the many beautiful atolls in the South Pacific. And so this engagement in the Pacific is going to be predominantly Marines and Navy, where we're going to see in Europe. Now, were there Army? Of course, there was Army and Army Air Corps, later on the U.S. Air Force in the Pacific. But likewise, in Europe, there's going to be predominantly the Army Air Corps, later on the U.S. Air Force, and the Army, where the Navy will be focusing their efforts in North Africa, and of course on the amphibious assault at the D-Day invasion. All right, so we've got a lot that we've got to unpack today, so let's just get right to it. The overall question I want to ask ourselves, and I'm going to move my ugly mug here out of the way so you can read the text, is explaining the causes and effects. We're going to be using that reasoning skill today. The causes and effects of victory of the United States and its allies over the Axis powers. That's the overarching question, but we're going to specifically look at the Pacific side of this and then the European side of this much later, and to parcel out key turning points that was the ultimate victory for the United States in its push forward. All right, so looking at the map here, let's get kind of our geographic context in place here. And just noting that the United States had 16 million people serving in uniform between 42 and 45. That's 11% of the United States population. Almost 1 in 10 individuals were serving in uniform in either the Pacific theater or in the European theater. And that's probably why, if not the definite reason, that we call the individuals engaging in this war effort the greatest generation, and rightfully so. Here's the Pacific Theater, located west of the international date line, west of the Hawaiian atoll. And that theater is going to be significantly larger than the European theater as far as territory goes. Manpower, we'll be talking about the difference between manpower in the Pacific and manpower in the European theaters. But from a territorial standpoint, from just pure geography, look at the size of the Pacific theater in comparison to the European theater. That's going to encompass the Solomon Islands just off the northeast coast of Australia, the Philippine archipelago, along with Okinawa, Iwo Jima, and then of course, Japanese islands at the close of the Pacific Theater with the engagements at Hiroshima and Nagasaki. In the Pacific Theater for today, we're going to briefly address the Bataan Death March, the Battle of Midway, the battle at Guadalcanal, Iwo Jima, Okinawa, and of course, Hiroshima and Nagasaki. I'm just going to touch briefly on that, but the next lesson that we'll have after the European lesson will be, of course, specifically on U.S. involvement and U.S. justification for the dropping of the atomic bombs. And that's, in fact, going to be your your quiz grade micro for this week with the dropping of the atomic bomb. In the European theater, we're going to be expanding our knowledge of North Africa and Italy. We're going to be looking, of course, at the D-Day invasion. Any discussion on Europe and World War II is going to have to include the D-Day invasion, along with the Battle of the Bulge and the idea that the Hitler's last stand, in essence, was there at the Battle of the Bulge in trying to push back any advancement towards Berlin. And because that's so much, just looking at the scope of what we're going to be dealing with today, I'd like to just look at the Pacific Theater, and we'll look in a separate lesson at the European Theater. Now, the Pacific Theater, as I said earlier, is predominantly going to be Navy and Marines, and the European Theater is going to be Army and Air Corps, later on Air Force. I'll be interchangeably referring to the Army Air Corps and Army Air Force, or the Air Force, as one branch, later on becoming the Air Force. And again, were there other elements of the four branches of the military in those theaters? Absolutely, but a predominant push, most of the victory is going to be with the admirals in the Pacific and the generals in the European theater. I'm thinking of Patton and Eisenhower, and then of course I'm thinking of Nimitz in the Pacific. So let's tighten our scope down. Let's focus a little bit closer on destination Tokyo. That's the goal. That's where the United States needs to get. And so today I want to explain the causes and effects of the victory of the United States at particularly Midway, Guadalcanal, Iwo Jima, and Okinawa. What was it about military strategy? Remember, we had a crippled fleet from the attack on Pearl Harbor. So what is it that the United States is going to do to really give Japan a run for its money? And that's going to begin, of course, at Midway, which we'll get to in just a second. But right after the bombing of Pearl Harbor, Japan had invaded the Philippines located in the South China Sea. And in their invasion, there was a small contingent of American and Filipino troops that were stationed and pushed back as much as they could with the advance of the Japanese into this area. The Japanese wanted Manila Bay. It's one of the deepest bays and harbors in the Pacific. And so that would be a key point from whence the Japanese would be able to establish a foothold in that region and to be able to expand their influence in the South Pacific much more easily, as opposed to relying on aircraft carriers to carry the bulk of their air power south. They could begin to establish these bases on these atolls throughout the South Pacific, and the Philippines was one of the keys to that objective. As Manila was invaded, General Douglas MacArthur pushed back as far as he could before he had to finally abandon the Philippines and head to Australia, vowing to return in 1945, in which he did. And many historians will go back and recount the ego of Douglas MacArthur, the public affairs that he would engage in trying to kind of paint a picture of victory. by staging some arrivals that he'll have in various other key campaigns. But at this point, Douglas MacArthur is going to have some of his credibility challenged because he, in other words, hightails it for the South and gets out of the Philippines. And the troops that are left behind have been captured in this area that we're going to call the Bataan Peninsula. And you'll see that Bataan Peninsula down there on the southwestern portion of your screen. And during this time period, 78,000 prisoners were taken captive. That's going to be 12,000 US troops and 66,000 Filipinos. And they're going to be pushed into a separate camp, Camp O'Donnell, here up to the north by the Japanese, to where those POWs are going to be held. And over the course of several days, they're going to journey the better part of 60 miles, both on foot and in railway cars, to the great abuse and neglect of the Japanese soldiers who are moving the Filipinos and Americans. And so that march becomes one of the darker chapters in American history with regards to the Pacific War. So the United States, after the bombing of Pearl Harbor, along with the Bataan Death March, are finding themselves not seeing many victories at this point. Japan really taking the lead in the Pacific, and so it's time for the United States to pony up and really push back. And that's going to begin, as we see. Here's kind of the overarching view. Let me move my mug out of the way and get back up here to the top of your screen. There it is in Pearl Harbor. Let me get my pointer out there in Pearl Harbor, and then we've got Midway Islands, which is going to be the next kind of engagement, if you will, in the Pacific. And you've got to keep thinking about this the entire time. The United States is just at this time beginning its North African campaign in Europe at the same time. And so without trying to balance the Pacific and Europe at the same time, we're going to focus in this area. And this is where Japan is really going to push much of its armada, much of its naval fleet into the Midway Islands to try to secure a foothold, in which historians are going to aptly call Midway as the midway point between Asia and the United States. And they're going to find that it's going to be challenging because the United States themselves are going to have a formidable front, which puts the Japanese Navy at a disadvantage. Japan, in its hubris, assumed that, much like Pearl Harbor, this would be an easy catch. Midway would be easy, but much of the success of the American intelligence is going to find that the United States is going to hear about the attack beforehand and be able to respond accordingly. So Japan's objective on this was Pearl Harbor Part 2, to establish a foothold into the Pacific and a base from whence they can continue to move eastward and secure their expanding territory. Their hope was to finish off the American naval fleet, particularly the aircraft carriers. The reason why they're going after the aircraft carriers is they weren't stationed in Pearl Harbor during the attack. It was mostly destroyers, battleships, and submarines. So the Japanese knew that those carriers were still out into the Pacific and made it a point to focus on getting those carriers out of commission. So establishing a base in the Pacific and finishing off that American naval fleet is going to be two of the main objectives for Japan. U.S. achievements with this are, well, monumental. It showed the quality of United States intelligence officials in being able to understand the movement of these ships through, of course, just good old-fashioned spying and intercepting of communications. Japan was not the best with regards to keeping information secret, and so the United States intel community was able to prepare two carrier battle groups, the Yorktown and the Enterprise, to prepare for this arrival, giving the Japanese quite a surprise at Midway. And it showed the importance of the aircraft carrier. The ramping up of production did begin back in the United States by building battleships. But once we saw the efforts of Midway get underway, the United States shifted that effort over to building more carrier battle groups, particularly aircraft carriers, because of the importance of being able to move an entire air fleet to specific areas at a very quick pace. And it also put Japan now in a defensive war for the role of the rest of the war. They, as opposed to being offensive at Pearl Harbor and offensive at Midway, Japan now found itself to being a defensive posture as the United States, through what we're going to call island hopping, going boom, 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 moving from one island to another, with that destination being Tokyo. Let's take a break from my talking for just a second and get just about 2 minutes or so to get some good visuals on what's happening at the Battle of Midway. Or not. Technology at its finest. There we go.
Japan strikes Pearl Harbor, and America is at war. The aircraft carrier Enterprise leads the U.S. Navy as it strikes back. Now Enterprise is about to face the massive Japanese fleet at Midway. The main force of Japanese ships headed toward Midway include 4 aircraft carriers, 7 battleships, 150 support ships, 248 carrier aircraft, and some 15 submarines. The American Armada is substantially smaller: 3 aircraft carriers, 50 support ships, 233 carrier aircraft, 127 land-based aircraft on Midway Island, and 8 submarines, outnumbered nearly 2 to 1. 6 months after Pearl Harbor, this is all that is left of America's Navy. The carriers were not present at the sneak attack.
The Japanese realize U.S. Navy aircraft carriers are still out there and are still dangerous. So what we need to do is get rid of their aircraft carriers and then set up one more outpost further out into the Eastern Pacific.
Dawn, June 4th, 1942. USS Enterprise floats near the exact center of the Pacific. A force of 109 Japanese aircraft appear over the atoll. They tear into the American base. 7 a.m. Reports of the attack on Midway reach the Enterprise. The flyers scramble to prepare for their launch. They'll have to fly nearly 2 hours to reach the Japanese ships. The Japanese carriers are hit by bombers.
I aimed at the big red circle at the front.
Enterprise's first attack on the Japanese fleet is breathtaking. The outnumbered flyers of Enterprise have wreaked havoc on the Imperial aircraft carriers.
He could look back and he could see the 3 big balls of fire, and there was the 3 Japanese ships that were on fire.
Now there's only 1 Japanese carrier left, the Hiryu. Just before 11 a.m., Hiryu launches its bombers, a retaliatory strike. The first American carrier that lands in the Hiryu bomber's sights is USS Yorktown. And 3 bombs make direct hits on Yorktown's flight deck. At mid-afternoon, a second wave of bombers arrives from the Hiryu. 2 of the torpedoes score direct hits on Yorktown's port side. The listing deck is a serious problem for Yorktown's flyers. The angle means the Yorktown's aircraft have no place to land. There's only one hope for the stranded flyers of Yorktown: the deck of Enterprise. But there's one more enemy carrier out there. After more than an hour in the air, the dive bombers from Enterprise and Yorktown come in range of Hiryu. When Police dives, it's a direct hit. The bow of Hiryu is torn apart. Fire spreads below decks. The Japanese Navy chooses to sink her. Admiral Yamamoto's plan to trap the American carriers has backfired spectacularly. In a single battle, 4 Japanese carriers are sunk. 1 cruiser is scuttled. 228 Japanese aircraft destroyed. And 3,000 Japanese sailors and crewmen are killed. Although the American losses include 1 destroyer and the carrier Yorktown, it is the most surprising victory in the annals of U.S. naval warfare. The epic naval clash off Midway Island changed the face of the Pacific War. It proved that America could not only fight back, it could win. Admiral Yamamoto and the Japanese High Command are shaken. They have awoken the giant and felt its wrath.
They have awoken the giant and felt its wrath. I'm humored just a little bit when I hear the pilots talk about using the Japanese flag on the flight deck of their Japanese carriers as basically targets. So I thought that wasn't the wisest choice of the Japanese to place a huge red circle on top of their flight deck, which made the bombardment that much easier. So what is it about the efforts at Midway that secured an American victory? Going back to our guiding question, what are the causes and effects of victories at these particular key battles, these turning points of the Pacific War? And so what is it about Midway that secured U.S. victory? Was it intel? Perhaps it was great intel in being able to understand the movement of the Japanese fleet. Was it just sheer might and military strength of air power? So those are some of the answers that I'm hoping you're generating with regards to what made the Battle of Midway a success for the United States. Now, as the United States continues this island hopping campaign, you could see on this map, it's going to kind of bounce from here to here, moving up to the central portions of the Pacific again, and then into the outer islands of the Japanese territories of Okinawa and Iwo Jima. But next stop is going to be Guadalcanal. And the Guadalcanal campaign is going to be a bloody and very long campaign. You'll see it lasted from August of 1942 all the way until February of 1943. The reason why Guadalcanal was so important to the Americans is because it was able to control the shipping lanes on the northeast portion of Australia, and it was going to secure any southern advances of the Japanese into Guadalcanal. So holding that Japanese territorial expansion is going to be vital, particularly south and in the area of the Australian subcontinent, the Australian continent, if you will. And if the United States was not able to hold Japanese advancement to the south, that would secure those shipping lanes in the south and prove to be a decisive victory for the Japanese. So all efforts now had to go south, and then the United States gets to turn its sights on the north, moving towards Tokyo, of course, with the ultimate destination being Tokyo. What made Guadalcanal a unique engagement at this point is, if you saw in the video, the Battle of Midway, it was a lot of air-to-air combat, but this is going to be close-range naval battle. Kind of the old pirate type battles where ships are yards apart, firing into each other. And this is going to be done over the course of an extensively long amount of time, resulting in numerous deaths. And historians will almost say Guadalcanal was a draw at some point, but the U.S. was able to hold this area barely. And so that continues to then go to Coral Sea and then finally up to the other island chains in their push and island hopping north. So from August of 42 to February of 43, the United States was on an offensive, but then found themselves to be in a defensive posture as the once air battle that had engaged had become a significant sea battle. But it did establish a U.S. base there, and that's why we consider it a success. But one of the more the troubling and sad stories that came out of this is the Sullivan brothers. And if you're curious about this story, I encourage you to go online and look that up. But 5 brothers were in this campaign, and all 5 brothers had perished during the Battle of Guadalcanal. Imagine the United States military having to approach the doorstep of that mother and say that all 5 of her boys had been killed in the Battle of Guadalcanal. So the U.S. military had begun to implement a sole survivor policy in which at least one surviving male heir to a family would be stationed in either a different campaign or in an assignment that wouldn't put them in a combat footing. So the Sullivan brothers, a famed tale of that in American history, comes out of this Battle of Guadalcanal and the sole survivor policy. Let's take another break for just a second and take a look at the significance of the Battle of Guadalcanal, about 3.5 minutes of your time.
After 6 grueling months of war, USS Enterprise had proven her steel at the Battle of Midway. But the Big E is about to face her greatest challenge yet: invasion at a place called Guadalcanal. The Solomon Islands lie in the center of shipping lanes in the Pacific, just 1,200 miles off the coast of Australia. Whoever controls the Solomons controls the war. And the Japanese Navy has made the island of Guadalcanal the center square in the chessboard of the Pacific. August 7th, 1942, the savage battle begins. Enterprise launches its air groups and bombards Guadalcanal. They first disable the enemy airstrip. The Japanese base is not prepared for an invasion. Minutes later, U.S. Marines storm ashore. By the next morning, the Marines have captured the Japanese airfield and renamed it Henderson Field. The initial invasion of Guadalcanal is a resounding success. The confident Navy brass sends Enterprise out to sea and away from the action, leaving only a token fleet to support the mopping up operations. But the victory celebration is premature, and the decision to send Enterprise to sea is fateful. The enemy ships steam down the New Georgia Sound, headed directly for the American fleet anchored off Guadalcanal. In just 32 minutes, the enemy sinks 4 heavy cruisers and badly damages a cruiser and a destroyer. What remains of the American fleet escapes out to sea. The Japanese send a massive carrier task force. Their plan: destroy Enterprise and the other American carriers and wipe out the Marines on the island.
That was the day we got our baptism of fire.
August 24th, 1942. Near the island of Guadalcanal, USS Enterprise is assaulted by combined aerial attacks. At 4:44 p.m., a dive bomber makes a direct hit on the Big E's deck. 30 seconds later, with another direct hit, her damaged control crews leap into action. A third bomb nails Enterprise. The blast punches a 10-foot hole in the flight deck. USS Enterprise is aflame and out of the fight. She returns to Pearl Harbor for repairs, and the enemy will seize this opportunity. Friday the 13th. The Japanese force has reached Guadalcanal. The two sides pound each other from close range. From the island, U.S. Marines watch the epic battle unfold. It goes on for hours. Dawn reveals the scene of an apocalypse. Is one of the darkest periods in the history of the U.S. Navy. But hope is just over the horizon. USS Enterprise is out of the repair docks and steaming into the fight. The first planes will head for Henderson Field and take out any Japanese ships or planes they encounter en route. Daybreak, November 15th, 1942. From the war-ravaged airstrip at Henderson Field, Bruce McGraw and his comrades from USS Enterprise head off in search of 4 surviving enemy transports. The 4 Japanese transports are busy unloading supplies and reinforcements. The Wildcats strafe the transports and beaches with heavy 50 caliber machine guns. One by one, the 4 transports and their cargoes of troops and supplies are sent up in flames and torn by machine gun fire. After more than 3 months of horrific combat, U.S. forces have finally tipped the scales at Guadalcanal. Henderson Field belongs to the Marines for good.
We all were very happy. Very, very happy. It was a long, long battle. We lost quite a few men. A lot of my friends there got hurt.
For the Japanese, defeat in the November clash destroys any hope for victory at Guadalcanal. Throughout the winter, American forces will continue to eliminate the last of the enemy troops still dug in on the island.
And so it is at that point that Japan is finally put into a position now where they're really going to be, in essence, digging their heels in and running. So Guadalcanal, a U.S. victory there. What is it, going back again to our guiding question, what is it about Guadalcanal that secured U.S. victory? Remember, this was a very long campaign drawn out for many, many months. I would lean towards perhaps the success of the Enterprise going back to Hawaii, getting repaired and jumping back into the fight, as well as the staying power of the United States and being able to dig their heels in and push back on some of the ground battles on the islands themselves at Guadalcanal. So the United States now is going to be turning its sights. Now, I've said earlier we could be spending an exhaustive amount of time talking about the Battle of Leyte Gulf, and earlier we could have talked about Doolittle's raid on Tokyo. But again, for the concise and abridged version of our discussion today, we're going to now turn to Iwo Jima and to Okinawa. This is going to be, in essence, Japan's last stand before we get to the actual bombings of Hiroshima and Nagasaki. I present to you Mount Suribachi. And just look at the physical geography of this mountain. This was, in essence, the mountain that the United States wanted to secure at Iwo Jima. Once they've secured that, they would have, of course, a significant foothold in the area, being able to watch fleets come in from a distance, air raids from a distance, as well as establishing a landing strip atop that mountain on that very flat kind of plateau that you see there at the very top. But just take a look at that physical geography for just a second and understand that the United States had to not only arrive on the shores of Iwo Jima, but scale the side of Mount Suribachi with armament, with weapons, with packs, and then take that mountain. And you'll see the famous photograph, of course, that had occurred during this time period. The significance was not only the acquisition of Japanese territory, but the significance is the Japanese of mainland territory. This is one of the islands that's considered part of mainland Japan. We're only situated about 700 miles from Tokyo. This could be used as an airfield to launch airstrikes from. So we would no longer have to get to the Enterprise or other air carrier battle groups near Tokyo to try to launch those planes off of the decks. They could instead launch aircraft from the islands themselves. And this proved to be a huge blow to the Japanese defense. And the famed Joe Rosenthal photo that you see here, that was also turned into a monument in Washington, D.C., while it is, of course, significant and iconic in the sense that it showed American victory in the Battle of Iwo Jima, really only marked the very beginning of the long campaign. Once they were able to storm Mount Suribachi and raise the flag, that was just the beginning of what is going to then be another long and continuous ground battle there on the island that's going to prove fateful for many additional tens of thousands of lives of both on the Japanese and on the American side. So yes, the Rosenthal photograph, iconic with American history, no doubt, but it's not really a tale to an end of a battle, but really only marks the very beginning. Let's take another break for a second and take a look at the raising of that flag, a pivotal moment in American history that we cannot escape talking about today.
For centuries, Mount Suribachi crowned a barren island of little value, Iwo Jima. But in 1945, two armies want it badly. Japan is using it to attack B-29s passing overhead. America sees it as an emergency landing strip. They will both now use it as a slaughterhouse. At 9:02 a.m., the first wave hits the sand. The beach is steep and loose. They struggle in the fine volcanic ash. But as more waves come ashore, more men and machines get stuck in the sand. Soon, the crowd on the beach reaches critical mass. That's when the Japanese open up.
I could look up from my foxhole, and it was just 20, 30 mortars in the air at a time.
By 9:20 a.m., it's an unceasing, ear-splitting barrage. No Japanese are on the beach itself. Most are entrenched on Mount Suribachi. Inside the mountain is a maze of tunnels and monster pillboxes, with walls up to 4 feet thick. The Japanese can pummel the entire beach with lead. Marines are trapped within yards of where they landed. The assault on Mount Suribachi begins by punching it from the air and sea. Americans make the dormant volcano seem alive again. Then, Marines start to climb up. Soon, blood starts to flow down. As usual, Americans rarely see the Japanese. So they pour fire into every hole. After 4 days of relentless fighting, a handful of Marines get to the top. They plant a small flag tied to some old Japanese pipe. A few hours later, a larger flag goes up. Gilberto Mendez can see it from his troop ship, and his emotions go into overdrive. He's about to come ashore to join the fight.
My heart was beating 1,000 times a minute. My skin was like chicken skin. I lost my fear. If those guys made it, I could. But it was false, that feeling, because the good stuff hadn't started yet.
He said the good stuff hadn't started yet. So the iconic Rosenthal picture really encapsulating the moment there at Mount Suribachi, but marking not an end to a conflict, but the beginning. And we begin now to wrap up our Pacific campaign at the Battle of Okinawa. In fact, it's going to be the last major campaign of the Pacific Theater before we get to the bombing of Hiroshima and Nagasaki. Over 180,000 US troops are going to assault this island. But what ended up happening is, much like they had predicted at the D-Day campaign, which we'll talk about in a separate discussion, they thought there was going to be a large defensive posture of the Japanese. But when they arrived on the island of Okinawa, it was basically a ghost town. There was a false hope of arrival. Many would drop their weapons and walk around. Some, even that afternoon in their own diary, said they took their shirts off and laid on the beach as if it was a small vacation. There was much confusion as to where these Japanese were. Unbeknownst to the American troops that arrived in Okinawa, the Japanese troops were just a little farther inland waiting for the Americans to arrive. So this false hope of arrival of success in taking Okinawa very quickly was met with probably the most significant warfare, if you will, of the Pacific. 130,000 Japanese soldiers are going to be waiting for them, using the foliage and the tunnels and those guerrilla tactics that were very famous during the battles of Iwo Jima. And that's going to prove fateful for the Americans. But again, it's with that pushing and that perseverance of this greatest generation that is going to allow them to continue pushing on and pushing on and pushing on, despite the relentless assault on the Japanese. One soldier had commented in Flags of Our Fathers that the movement during these campaigns were not measured in miles, but instead in inches. We moved a total of 8 inches today, sounding very familiar, if you will, to the kind of the trench warfare, the fighting, the attrition that we saw during the First World War is also occurring here at the Battle of Okinawa. 50,000 plus casualties for the United States alone, just a little under half of what the Japanese had experienced, with 100,000 plus casualties. And that's not taking into fact that Okinawa was a very populated island. And so some of those battles and skirmishes did move into populated areas. And so there's very little data to show how many civilians, innocent civilians, were killed during this campaign. The last stand of Japan in the Battle of Okinawa.
We're continually moving in closer toward Okinawa Shima. Directly overhead, squadrons of dive bombers, our dive bombers, fly towards the island of Okinawa to meet the Japs. We can see the yellow smoke of the gunfire above the battleships. We are passing transports over our starboard and over our port as we plow ahead, headed for the beach and headed for the Jap.
We debarked from our ships. We landed in Okinawa and we had no idea of what kind of resistance we will encounter. There were no Japanese, there were no natives, there was nothing. We made our way immediately to the airport that had been deserted by the Japanese, and we found a good many destroyed planes and bombs, but no resistance. By the end of the second day, we had crossed the island, and that was when our trouble began. Our progress was not by miles and not by hundreds of yards, but practically by inches, because the resistance was very strong. There's not a single one of my team who got away uninjured.
So it is going to be the success of the campaigns in Iwo Jima and in Okinawa that's really going to show a strong American presence in the Pacific. Now, the challenge for the United States is a land invasion in Japan, mainland Japan, on the island of Honshu. And the question that military leaders are grappling with at this very moment is how many American lives would be lost if there was a land invasion, much like the D-Day invasion at Normandy. Should the United States engage in an arrival on the southern part of the island and move north towards Tokyo via land, or should this be an air assault? So some of these questions are being bounced around, if you will, in Washington at the same time that the United States is beginning to wrap up the war efforts in Europe. Remember, while all of these campaigns are happening in the Pacific, there is still a massive military campaign that is happening in the European theater. So for today, I just want to look at the overall causes and effects of victory of the United States at Midway and Guadalcanal, Iwo Jima, and Okinawa. Should you have to write a small response to briefly describe or analyze the extent to which the United States was successful during the Pacific campaign, hopefully you've got some specific evidences that you can use to help to underscore your thesis. So what is it about the Pacific campaign that made the United States so successful? In our next discussion, in a whole separate video, again, I was going to combine both of these and put them into one, but I thought, now can you imagine if we started to unpack Europe on top of this? It'd be just way too much information. So when we meet next time, we'll be looking at the various causes and effects of victory of the United States in the North African and Italian campaigns, of course, at the Normandy invasion, and at the Battle of the Bulge, Hitler's last stand. And I look forward to you joining me with those lessons and those discussions in the days ahead. And then we'll get back to Japan, in which I'll get you to produce a micro-write for me looking at justification for the bombing of Hiroshima and Nagasaki, or Hiroshima, the interchangeable pronunciation of that. All right, so that's it for the Pacific, ladies and gentlemen. World War II well underway. We'll get to Europe next time. And I thank you for taking just a few moments out of your busy schedule to join me for this moment of learning. And I look forward to welcoming you back right here next time. Be of good health and be well.